Paris, 7th arrondissement, a father's unexpected journey. Paris, 7th arrondissement. The morning began with coffee and a schedule of meetings. I am Julian Monroe, a 40-year-old owner of a marketing agency, a rational, successful, and, as I always thought, predictable man. While I was signing a contract with a new client, my gaze accidentally fell on the reception desk. A boy was sitting there, about 9 years old, dark-haired, reserved, with a laptop on his lap. He seemed to be listening attentively to everything happening around him without losing focus. "Who is that?" I asked Laura, our intern. "That's Madame Verneude's son, your secretary. School is closed today, and she had no one to leave him with." I nodded and felt a chill down my spine, his eyes, his chin. Even his facial expressions when he furrowed his brow, all of it was too familiar, too much like mine. Mademoiselle Clara Verneude came to work for me almost 8 years ago, brilliantly educated, impeccably composed, always reserved, with a light scent of jasmine. I never delved into her personal life. We had a brief affair at the beginning of her employment, without obligations, by mutual consent. Then, silence. I went into her office, and she, as always, stood up when I entered. "Clara," I began, "your son, he looks remarkably like me." "Julian," her voice trembled, "I didn't want you to find out this way. But now that you've noticed," she slowly sank into her chair. "His name is Paul. He's 9. And you're his father." Recalling that evening is like opening an old wine that has gone bad with time. Clara and I were drunk after the corporate party. Paris seemed safe, almost intimate. We spent the night at my place, then both pretended nothing had happened. 2 months later, she went on a short vacation, then returned as calm as before. Not a single hint, not a single complaint. She didn't ask for money, didn't demand recognition, didn't drive my life. And only now did I realize, all this time, he was somewhere nearby. My son. I left Clara's office and closed the door behind me. My heart pounded somewhere in my throat, a feeling of unreality, as if I had opened a door behind which another life was hidden. My life. But without my knowledge. Paul. His name was Paul. I remembered how he looked at me in the morning, with a slight interest, but without fear. Confidently, like someone who knows. We have a connection, even if no one articulated it. At that moment, I realized, I want to know more, not out of guilt, but because he is a part of me. On Friday, I invited Clara to take a walk after work. We went down to the Seine, sat on a bench near Pont Neuf. I brought 2 coffees from the kiosk, like before, when we just talked after office rushes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Clara looked at the water, holding her breath. "I was in a panic, Julian. We weren't in a relationship. We didn't love each other. It was a night, an accident. I didn't know how you would react, and then it was too late. You didn't even try." "I did try. I dialed your number twice, but then I watched how you lived. Business, meetings, women. You were happy. And I decided that Paul should have a father within himself, not in your shadow." I felt something inside me breaking. "Does he know about me?" I asked. She turned to me, holding back tears. "He knows he doesn't have a typical father. He knows that I once loved a smart but cold man, and that I didn't dare to tell him the truth. But he's been guessing for a long time. He looks too much like you, Julian." A few days later, I invited Paul to the office. His eyes carefully surveyed everything around: glass walls, computers, fashionable designer chairs. But he wasn't scared, rather interested. "Hi, Paul," I said, trying to smile. "Want to see where your mom works?" He nodded and sat down next to me, not letting go of his backpack. "You look like me," I said, deciding to start the conversation. "I know," he replied with a slight smile. "Mom says I'm your reflection." We talked for a long time about simple things, about soccer, about movies, about Paris. But emotions surged within me, a mix of pride, fear, and guilt. He was my son, but all this time I had only been an observer of his life. After the meeting, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Memories of those years when Clara and I were young and carefree, intertwined with reality. How could it have happened that I lived for almost a decade without suspecting the existence of a son? "You must be there," I told myself in the morning, not as a stranger, but as a father. Later at work, I noticed that Clara became nervous when Paul and I were together. She was afraid that we would change the usual order of things. One day, Clara invited me to dinner. We sat in a small bistro, and tension arose between us. "Julian," she began, I'm afraid you'll take him and leave our lives. Paul isn't ready for this. I don't want to take him, I replied. I want to be a part of his life. His father. You're too distant. You live in a world where you have everything, and he's a child with trauma. You don't understand how difficult this is. We argued, but in the end, I understood. To become a real father, it takes time and patience. That evening at the bistro stayed with me forever. Candles softly glowed on the tables, faces around were a blurred shadow, and between us, as if an invisible wall, Clara looked at me with a weariness that came from the depths of her soul. You think it's that simple, to just come and become a father? Her voice trembled. Paul lost his mom when he was 6. His father left and he grew up alone with my mother. Every day is a struggle. I took her hand carefully so as not to scare her. Why didn't you tell me then? I asked softly. Because I was afraid, she replied. Afraid that I would ruin your life, that you would reject me and him. But I was wrong, and now I want to fix it. I felt something old tearing inside me, and in its place, a new hope grew. The following weeks became a test for all of us. Paul initially kept his distance, but gradually began to open up. We cycled together along the Canal Saint Martin, baked baguettes at the small bakery on the corner, and even watched old Jean Gabin films. One day, Paul told me about his dream, to become an architect, like the hero of the film we watched together. You can do it, I said. I'll help you. And for the first time in a long time, I felt my life changing, not according to plan, but for the better. Paris, a city of contrasts. In my agency, amidst glass and concrete, strictness and order reigned. But outside the windows, life surged. Street musicians, the noise of cars, the smell of fresh croissants and spices. Clara continued to work for me, but tension grew between us. Her glances were sometimes cold, and her words sharp. She was afraid of losing control of a situation where I, finally, appeared as her son's father. You don't just appear and become part of their world, she said one evening. Paul is used to calm and security. You are a whirlwind that can destroy everything. I understood her fears, but I couldn't back down. One day, at a business reception, I ran into a woman from my past, Eliza, a former lover who knew everything but kept silent. Julian, she said with a slight smirk, heard the news? You have a son now? Is it true? I nodded, feeling her gaze full of interest and perhaps envy. Are you ready for this? She asked. Ready? I answered firmly. The meeting with Eliza reminded me how many secrets each person has, and how difficult it sometimes is to make the right choice. My son's birthday was approaching. I wanted to surprise him, but I was afraid of how Clara and her family would react. We had a small party in Clara's cozy Parisian apartment. Paul beamed with happiness, received gifts and friendly hugs. At that moment, I understood. I wasn't just a father on paper. I had become a part of the boy's life. Almost half a year had passed since I learned the truth. 6 months filled with new sensations, struggle, fears, and hopes. But now, everything was about to change. One evening, as it began to rain in Paris, Paul, Clara, and I sat in the small living room of her apartment. Paul took the first independent step. He told us how he really felt about our complicated triangle. Dad, he began, I always knew you were a part of me, but I'm afraid that if Mom and you fight, I'll lose both of you. Clara looked at me with heavy weariness, and understanding lit up in her eyes. We won't be enemies anymore, she said quietly. We are family. There's no other way. And at that moment, looking at Paul's face, my son, I realized that no secrets or fears could destroy what we had begun to build together.